As entrepreneurs, we understand the roller coaster of emotion that comes with bringing a business to life.
Most of the reason that companies fail is because the founder doesn't get out of the way of the growth of the company.
The reality is, whether you're building a company or scaling your side hustle, there's no way to completely avoid the chaos.
Everybody wants to be in an environment of control and not chaos.
Now, balance that with your personal life, that's where it gets even harder.
Your business is something that you need to pour into like a relationship.
Get the answers from top business leaders, authors, founders, and productivity experts so you can organize the chaos in your business.
There's no such thing as common sense. There's only documentation.
Welcome to Organized Chaos, the show where you can take a page out of business leaders' playbooks with me, your host, Chris Ronzio. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Organized Chaos Live. And today's conversation is going to be all about pricing, particularly how you price your product during this kind of recessionary environment that we're in. And we'll talk about whether or not we're actually in a recession. We're going to have a specific emphasis on SaaS products, software as a service, because our guest specializes in that. But if you're not in SaaS, there will be tons of applications, gems, takeaways that you can apply to your business. So to kick things off, if you're watching live in the comments, I would love to know, has your business or the company that you work for made any changes to your pricing because of what's happening in the macro market? If so, I want to know, what's the change that you've made? What's been the impact so far? Because we'll work that into our conversation. All right, joining me today, Patrick Campbell. Patrick is the CEO of ProfitWell, recently acquired by Paddle, and we'll talk about that too. It's a software for helping subscription companies with their monetization and retention strategies, and we've been using it for years and years and years. In fact, I have ProfitWell t-shirts that I still wear all the time. Patrick, when you come in, I feel like they're almost a t-shirt of my own company because I just look at my dashboards and metrics. It feels like an internal tool. So that's how much I love ProfitWell. Prior to ProfitWell, Patrick led strategic initiatives for Boston-based Gemvara, and he was an economist at Google and with the U.S. intelligence community. So super smart guy. Patrick, so glad to have you here.
What's up, man? It's good to see you. It's been a while, and I love the production. This is you've come a long way, Chris. You come a long way. It's exciting.
Stepping it up. You were on, I think, probably like the first 10 or 20 episodes that we ever did. It was a different podcast name, but if anyone wants to go back, you can see a super early interview with me and Patrick. I think I've got like a wrinkled logo, like a bed sheet behind me, maybe.
You know what? That's how it is. You got to start small. You got to jam, and then eventually you get some StreamYard, and you get some good live stuff going. So excited.
We fancy now. You're fancier than me because your recent acquisition. And where are you calling in from? You told me before we jumped on here.
I'm in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So moved here like slightly before the acquisition, and been enjoying the beaches, all that kind of stuff. I was in Utah, and then I was in Boston for about a decade. So I'm enjoying the beach life a little bit, although I've never really been in the beach life before, so it's a little different.
Well, in Arizona, we say we have lots of beach, but no water. Like just all sand. We've got the sand part of the beach. All right, so let's get into the topic at hand here. I'm sure you get asked about this a lot. I saw a blog post that you read. That you wrote about recession. Are we in a recession? Are we headed into a recession? What's your take on this?
Yeah. So my take is the answer doesn't really matter because at a macro level, if we're like sitting around drinking coffee and arguing about what's going to happen in the world and no ability to affect it, I think technically we're in a recession. It's a really weak one right now. But I think that the reason I said it doesn't really matter is because I think people think we're in a recession, and one of the hallmarks, it's kind of like traffic. If everyone just agreed to not think like they were in a recession, like we wouldn't make it worse, right? But everyone's kind of been like cutting. We've seen this in the data. People have been cutting very similar to right when COVID started. So extremely similar relationship in terms of the data where you're seeing these like three waves that are happening. So this is the bad news. The bad news is the first wave started around February, March. And this is when people start looking at their expenses, their balance sheets, and just start, do we need this? Do we need this? Do we need to let people go, et cetera? Those are the people who are typically very experienced who did that first. And then the second wave was all the people who didn't do it going, ooh, yeah, we probably should do that now. And that was, a few months later. And then the third wave are finally the people who either didn't cut as deep as they should have earlier, or people who are finally getting around to making some cuts. The good news is that historically, and we have data, for those that don't know our business, we have access to a large bevy of financial data. And that's where I'm able, that it's all B2B data. So we can see what consumers are doing, and obviously what businesses are doing. The good news is when we looked at the past like 4 or 5 recessions, we basically found that historically, the 3 cuts is always what happens. So what I'm trying to say is like we're at the end of the 3 cuts. It doesn't mean we're at the end of a recession. It doesn't mean that like the global economy will not have problems. And it doesn't mean that this won't change, but it does mean that if your business, quote unquote, survived up until probably, I would argue, the end of September, just to be safe, your existing customers will be staying with you because they've kind of chosen to keep you when they're thinking of cutting. If you're a consumer company, meaning you sell to directly to like, consumers, it's going to be a little bit sketchy. It just kind of depends on the government. Like, the student loan thing will bevy up some folks, the canceled student loans. There will be some different changes that happen as we get into an election season. There might be some stimulus or something that won't necessarily be direct, but it'll affect things. But long story short, I think that we're not at the end or anything, but we're now in a very stable place. And I think I can get into like what I think people should do, but hopefully that answers your questions about it doesn't really matter. We're in it. And, we're kind of on an upswing or at least a stable place, which I think is good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because when I see all the headlines, it's like, who cares about the technicality? Like, are people pulling back their spending?
Yeah, like what the definition of recession is. Like, yeah, technically we are on the definition, but as like on one hand, like, yes, it's kind of stupid to say, well, technically that's not the definition as the administration has. But on the other hand, they're also partially right that it's more than just like this number definition. And I think I think things aren't great, but they're not as bad as like news cycles will let it believe, and then the numbers will tell the story in the next couple of quarters.
So when you talk about these 3 waves, did you see explicitly in the data like these spikes in churn or something, or where people were just canceling and then it came back down and then another spike and then another?
Yep. So you basically see the less spikes. They are spikes if you look at the data you're describing, but like it's more just the growth will kind of stall. Because the other thing to kind of keep in mind for a lot of businesses is that, and this is something that I think it's really important for everyone to do, is if you're selling to other businesses, there are different verticals or segments or archetypes, depending on who you sell to, that are affected differently, right? So beginning of the COVID situation, right, which is only a couple of years old, all of a sudden, if you're selling to a company or a type of company that has anything to do with in-person, those were churning. You can't sell, you can't get new customers in those markets, right? Hotel chains, hotel software, et cetera, right? But if you were selling to a company that built, in this case, like remote work software or, telehealth, or you were, a consumer brand selling telehealth, or a consumer brand selling, D2C goods, e-commerce goods that, people normally get at the store, you were going crazy, right? You were growing like crazy, right? And so I think that the first thing I always recommend to people when you're hitting like a downturn, and this might happen again, right? Like the Fed said they're going to raise rates, and to kind of explain this simply, what that means is that theoretically they're trying to like slow the economy a bit because the economy has been going a little crazy, inflation's high. But really what they're trying to do is they're trying to control the unemployment number rather than the inflation number. And what that means for you as a business is it could get a little rocky. But the point I'm trying to make is right now, or if it gets a little rockier, you should be reevaluating who you sell to. Not like the exact person, but like the different segments, right? So if you're selling a little bit more to, I don't know, like, let's just say, the COVID example is so clean, but right now, like for example, I would go look at entertainment companies, because in recessions, entertainment companies, especially like movie theaters, those types of like entertainment class, they typically do really well because it's rather cheap entertainment. If you're selling to maybe like people who serve those going on vacations, they're probably going to get hit because the gas prices and all that kind of stuff, it's a little bit harder to go on vacation, right? So that's like an example of like just reevaluate your personas and just literally go down the line and be like, do we feel like these people are going to change or not? Most aren't going to change, but then there's going to be some where you're like, we should go after this market because we think it's going to accelerate, or we should stop going after this market because it's going to go flat.
I thought you were going to say that the movie theaters were going to get hit again. And I was like, oh, those movie theaters.
Well, there's some other things going on there just with like, the streaming stuff being so good. But the concept of cheap entertainment, like what is a replacement for going to Orlando, right? It's, doing some stuff around, the local city. So like campsites will probably do really well, as they do typically in recessions and things like that.
Did you see that Disney Plus subscriptions past Netflix, or their revenue past Netflix?
I didn't see that actually, but I believe it. Yeah, it's we did a big study on this for some content, and historically, the thing that people don't realize is that nostalgia factor is so strong in content, like media. So when you have Marvel, when you have Star Wars, when you have all the kids movies going up against like good content on Netflix, like great content, but kind of like the equivalent of watching like a TNT movie. Like it's definitely better than a TNT movie, but it's like, that's what that is compared to Star Wars and Marvel. Like, yeah, it's kind of hard to compete with that. And that's why when everyone was like crapping on Disney Plus, I was like, just wait. They're not idiots. They're not dumb. They've been storytellers for a century.
They know what they're doing. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that's why we're so rooted in 90s R&B and pop culture. It's nostalgia is valuable.
Yeah, totally, man.
All right. So the COVID examples were easy. Are there any verticals you're seeing that are particularly struggling right now?
I think most verticals that serve like they're called basically the underbanked. So like think of it this way, like any vertical that serves wealthy individuals, you're kind of in protected markets, right? That's why when they talk about the real estate market, like the highest part of the real estate market, maybe the prices come down, but the volume doesn't necessarily go down, right? Whereas the volume of like, common or low end residential units, those will tank, right? And so it's kind of like there's some consumer companies that were selling more like nice to have like D2C subscription e-commerce products that like, maybe I go to the corner store to get my razor or my deodorant or my vitamins because getting them through this e-commerce site is actually like double the price. Like I like those better, but it's not worth the price, right? And then software companies that are kind of serving consumers are getting hit. Or that are serving other businesses that serve direct consumers are getting hit. Like B2B is doing relatively well. Like B2B is like undefeated typically in terms of these types of things. Like in COVID, yes, there were the obvious winners and losers, and same thing with right now with this little blip, but it's like 80% of the group is just keep going, keep going. Yeah. And so I think that's the big thing to keep in mind is like, yeah, if you're in an obvious hit, like in either direction, like it's just that sucks, right? But like most of us, there's just no excuse for continuing to execute.
So then when you're looking at the data for SaaS companies, are there any metrics that just feel like they're bottoming out, or like that they keep tanking and you're like, oh, this doesn't look good? Like is LTV going down across the board? Is our conversions going down, or trials? Like, is there anything that you're seeing macro?
So it's hard to, it's kind of hard because it's not like it's not always a perfect, spike when we're looking at like aggregate data, right? I will say that like some of the bloodletting or the churn that was happening has paused. Now that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going back to no one churning, right? It just means like it's getting better, right? And I think that, very similar to COVID, like COVID in the B2B market, there were 3 weeks where things stalled. Didn't go down, just stalled with B2B, and then B2B just went right back at it, right? Yeah. Whereas like e-commerce, basically, you had a 3-week stall because everyone was like, am I going to have a job or not? And then it just exploded. And then because they suck at retention, even, right after that Black Friday, Cyber Monday of 2020, it just kind of like started leveling off, right? Because there was so much more churn. So I think that like, there's no more spiking, but it's not like great, we're back to normal. Like we're not quite there. It's kind of like we're stable, kind of across the board. Certain verticals, like we were talking about, we're starting to see some spiking in the right directions and wrong directions, but it's just a little too early to tell.
Okay.
This is why economists they're really great at predictions only in the past though. So they're really, really great at being like, oh, a quarter from now, I can tell you what happened today. But we try to and it's, partially because these things don't move as quickly on a daily basis. It's more of like, you have to see 3 weeks and you're like, oh, that's what was happening. Right. But we try to be like a month rather than like 2 quarters, in terms of predictability and things like that.
Yeah. All right. So last time we talked a lot about pricing. I mean, that's a big part of your expertise. And I'm curious, is there any advice that you would be giving differently given this market about how SaaS businesses should be pricing what they do?
Yeah. So great question. I think that there's a couple of things. I think one, you need to realize that, again, as I was saying before, if you have your customers now, especially in B2B, those customers are with you. And historically, these kind of little blips or downturns are come in a couple of flavors. One flavor is, and this is like really early 2000s flavor. We haven't really seen this in a long time, a little bit, and even in 2008, but new customers will go zero, meaning like you just will stop getting as many new customers. And then your existing customers, because they've chosen you, are more than willing to pay more, and they're more than willing to like take a look at your pricing, right? Or take a look at new offerings that you offer. And so I think that one big thing to kind of keep in mind is I don't think we're quite there. I think if you reevaluate your segments, what you'll notice is people will cut, maybe some people churned, and then all of a sudden, again, those people who are with you chose you, and then your new revenue will kind of continue at the clip that it was going. And so I think that it's one of those things where the thing I'm trying to say is because of that phenomenon, you should be raising prices on your existing customers. Not because they're with you and they chose loyalty, but because you probably haven't changed your prices in years, because most people don't. You should be changing and, basically raising your price on your existing product at least once a year, assuming that you're making progress on it. And assuming your NPS or whatever you measure is over 20, and NPS over 20 is pretty weak actually, then you should be raising your price. And I think that's a really big thing that's hard for people to understand because they're scared right now, right? But it's like when the market was good, you also were scared, right? So you're just constantly scared to change your pricing. And I get it because it sits at the intersection of important and uncomfortable. And whenever we have things at the intersection of important and uncomfortable, like that's what happens. But I think ultimately, like the big thing you got to think about is, it's a good time to do it. You have to do it in the right way, which we're happy to get into. The second thing is finding different avenues to upgrade folks. So add-ons, additional products, localization, meaning just internationalizing your price, meaning you have different prices in different regions. Even if only 20% of your customer base is in a different region, it's a really good thing to start implementing because you'll start getting higher volume in certain places where you're priced too high. You'll start getting more revenue in certain places where you're priced too low. And then I think that I would say we can go deeper on any of these. If you get really scared or you're like, I'm unique, I'm a beautiful snowflake, which everyone typically thinks, which is fine. The biggest hack that you should be doing is how do I get more community and more free? So one of the big things we saw during COVID is that some folks would try freemium offerings or community-based offerings because everyone's looking for information or everyone's get a little skittish, especially B2B customers during kind of recessions or things like this. And so if you can find a way to bring as many of those people into you now and kind of take advantage of that feeling, even though it's a negative feeling, whoever holds on to the most customers at the end of this ends up winning, right? And so one of the most successful things that we saw was one company, they did these competitive offerings because B2B companies are looking to cut, and they went to people who are with giant, offerings that just were sucky anyways, but they didn't have an excuse to leave. And they said, we will basically buy out your existing contract if you come to our offering, which really just meant we'll give it to you for free until your contract with that company is up. And then you'll start paying us, right? It was a really bold move. They were well capitalized to do it, but they came out of COVID in this case just roaring because they all of a sudden had these customers who started paying them that they had acquired when everyone was really scared. So those are some things to kind of think about.
So that particular strategy, I want to dig into a lot of these things, but that particular example, I've talked about that with mentors and toyed with the idea. And you see big companies, big brands doing it, like Verizon will buy out AT&T contracts or whatever, and when they're in a marketplace like that, where there's a couple very obvious competitors, it makes sense. You want to just target them directly. When you're in a growing market or you've got some kind of, startup competitors, do you want to cast a wide net and say and kind of point out all these other brands, or do you think that's what do you think about that strategy?
You don't have to point out the brands, right? Like, just imagine you can just say like, we'll buy out your contract. You don't have to say AT&T. It's like, oh, you have an existing, one of the reasons you might not be converting is because you have an existing contract or an annual plan with your current help desk provider. Great. Doesn't matter who it is, we'll buy it out, right? I think it's like the thing about pricing and the thing about competition and some of these other concepts, and I'm going to rant for a second here, is like a lot of these things, it's like we should never infantilize our customers, right? And I think what we think sometimes is like, well, what if we let them know about a competitor? And it's like, they know that they know there's other solutions. They know, like, they maybe found you and they love your product, but they know that, like, maybe they don't know the names of them, but they're like, Chris can't be the only person doing this, right? Maybe he's the best person doing this, but he can't be the only person on earth doing this thing. Same thing with pricing, right? Oh, I'm scared to like talk to them about pricing because what if they're scared away? It's like, people know things cost money, right? Like, they know things cost money. And yes, they're not doing like a magic calculus of like, well, if it's this much value, it's this price, right? But it's like one of those things where I think that, we're just kind of scared to kind of, push things forward. Like, one of our early pricing pages, we put our competitor logos on our pricing pages. Like, we were just like, you're going to do the research. So like, we've done it for you. Like, go check out our competitors. Like, we know you'll be back. Right. And I think that's a sign. It's a nice little flex because you have to make sure your product can back it up. But also it's like, hey, like, we know these people exist. Here's who they are. Awesome. You know what I mean? Like, just check it out. So yeah, little rant, not exactly what you were saying, but I think it's
infantilize your customers. Is that what you said? Or
don't infantilize them.
Babies. I feel like I'm gonna forget how to say infantilize by next week.
Yeah, don't treat them like babies. Like, treat them like adults, like they are. They're not always gonna act like adults, but treat your customers like adults. And
yeah,
I don't know.
Totally.
It's just kind of funny with some of this stuff.
All right, so raising prices, like you said, it's kind of a taboo thing. Like, you're afraid to do it in good times or in bad times. But I think particularly now, the more you can get the right customers and hold on to the right customers, the stronger you'll come out of this. And if those right customers are willing to pay more because they really value your solution, then it makes sense to try to push price a little. So if you go down that path, do you have a recommendation on how much to increase pricing? Like, if you're just dipping your toe in the water, where do you start?
Yeah. So what you really should be doing is when you're doing this right, you would go out and you would talk to some customers and you do it in a proper manner, which I'm happy to get into, or you'd send and collect some data. And you would not only talk to your current customers who are obviously anchored at your existing price, but you would go talk to people who are in your target customer base who have never heard of you, right? And so you'd kind of go to that crowd and then kind of compare and contrast, right? And if you're, let's say, less than 10 million in revenue, like, we're not thinking about, am I a $10 product versus an $11 product? Like, that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about, like, are we a $10 product? Are we a $15 product? Really, are we a $10 or $50 product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a $100 product, or so on and so forth, right? And I think people get too caught up in, like, it needs to be this like really precise measure. And it's like, no, you're going to use some judgment because you're going to get a bunch of information and you're going to earn your paycheck, which is like to take all that information in and then make a decision, right? And so when it comes to pricing, what you end up doing is, I'll just get into some of the questions that I'll collect data on, but like, you'll go collect data on, human beings. We think about price as a spectrum. Like, psychologists and economists have studied this for a really long time. We know that this water bottle is worth less than this camera, because we've purchased these things in the past. We were anchored, but we also like naturally understand, like, one provides a different or higher level of value because water is presumably commoditized, and this camera's not, right? But all of a sudden, you put me in the desert for 3 days, like, my value calculus changes, right? So there's like context, that ends up happening. And So it's a lot easier for us to answer these ranged questions, like which one's worth more, rather than something like how much is this worth, right? So there was a couple of folks who came up with some interesting questions, like at what point is this way too expensive? You would never consider purchasing it, right? If I'm on a sales call and someone's asking me about price, I'd be like, hey, at what point is it so expensive that you wouldn't return my next call, right? And then questions like, at what point is this such a good deal? You'll sign today, right? Like these range type of questions. So I'll go do a little bit of research.
Car dealership.
Like, there you go. I mean,
what price do you have
right?
to buy it today? All right, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, but it's important. But like that, and it's because the reason they're doing that, it's obviously more of a sales tactic in that particular sense. But you're able to like that's an easier question because you can think of that rather than what would you pay for this, right? It's just harder. Now, it's not an easy, but it's an easier question. Yeah. So I'd go collect some data from, at least 10 qualitative people, and then maybe send a survey to get like 100, 150 responses, and then kind of compare and contrast the numbers. And then what you normally find, and there's some other questions you should ask. So we're not doing an exhaustive, research method class here, but what you normally find, what I typically find is that 90% of the companies that do this research, they discover they're underpriced with their existing customer base even. So they find out their existing customer base is willing to pay more, not always that much more because again, they're anchored, but then the people who have never heard of them and haven't used the product, but in their target customer base are willing to pay a lot more typically because they never did this research. They got into a room and they went, what should the price be? I don't know, like so-and-so is charging this much. We should just charge that much. Okay. And then they didn't revisit it for another 3 to 5 years, right? Like it takes 3 to 5 years, like for another price increase typically to happen. And if a PE firm buys you tomorrow, first thing you're going to do, raise the price every time because the founder is too much of a wuss to do it. And the PE firm's like, I don't care. Like they'll just go do it. Right. Now, presumably we found a number. So we have a number. The next step is, okay, let's say if it's over 100% of where we are now. So you're at 50 and it's $100. That's probably the limit of raising a price. And even then that's a little high. Normally you don't want to do more than like a 50% price increase at once, because it's just emotionally, it's just too much for customers, even if they're willing to pay it. So what I would do in that situation is I would raise my price on my existing customer base over time. So maybe over 3 years or 2 years or whatever, how many years, depending on what it is. And then for new customers, I would basically change the price immediately. Now, the thing that people get wrong is normally the communication strategy. If someone's receiving a 50% increase, they probably need a different conversation or a different, more personalized conversation. So you got to use your judgment. Going from $1 to $2 is very different than going from $50 to $500, right? But everyone should receive communication in the context of them. So what I mean by that is here's a little email for everybody, right? So I'm going to start an email out where I'm going to say something along the lines of, over the past year, we have gotten you this many contacts. You've inserted this many trainings inside Trainio. We've recovered this much revenue using ProfitWell. We added this feature and you use this feature every day. So I'm pulling in actual data about that specific customer, right? Yeah. And then I'm going to say, for us to continue to invest in making ProfitWell great for Trainio, great for you, great for your company, we need to raise our prices, right? So I'm saying I'm raising my prices because I'm going to increase the value for them. I want to reinvest for them. It's always a shock. Doesn't matter how much they love you. Doesn't matter how much value you did. So the next section is going to be, but because you've been so loyal, because you've been with us 3.5 years or 3.2 years or whatever it is, we are going to raise prices on everyone else, on everyone new, all those disloyal people. You're not going to say this dramatically, but we're going to raise prices on all new customers. But for you, because you've been with us for so long, you're going to keep your existing price for the next 6 months. And then afterwards, which is X dollar value. And then afterwards, we'll increase your price. If you have any questions let me know. Right. And then the PS is super, super crucial. The PS is, if this materially impacts your business or you, let me know and we'll figure something out. And the reason you do that PS is for two types of people. One, for people who are actually impacted. It's a great brand opportunity. Oh my gosh, I'm going through these hardships, blah, blah, blah. And you can go, and most people try to negotiate with you. Most people are like try to meet you in the middle, and you can just go, hey, don't worry about it. You figure your stuff out. We'll reach out next year. Don't even worry about it, right? It's a great brand opportunity. The other type of person it's for is for guys like you and me. We see expenses. We don't want anything to go up, even if it's valuable. But when you've laid out the value, you're giving me this little legacy discount, as it's called. And then all of a sudden you're like, let me know and we'll work something out. I'm like, I don't want to make it hard on so-and-so. I get it. Okay, fine. Right. Or I don't believe you and I don't believe the value you provided. I'm going to respond and be like, yeah, your app's buggy and everything sucks. And then you have an opportunity to have a conversation with me. But that copy or that message, notice it's about them. It's not about us. It's not about us at all. It's all about them. It's about the value. Too many price increase emails I see. It's all like our costs went up, inflation, blah, blah, blah. And it's like your customers do not give two hoots about your content or your costs. They care about their costs, right? And so it's got to be about them. So yeah, that's my little.
That was gold. I mean, that the email that you just laid out there, anybody that's listening to this needs to just take notes or replay that email, write down the script, because basically you just laid it out. That was a template for anytime you're raising prices. You mentioned that, you know, if you haven't done this before, maybe you want to do this on like an annual kind of cadence. Is there ever a time when you should be raising prices more frequently, like, you know, quarterly, or just watching NPS?
You should be changing something about your price or your pricing, your monetization every quarter, but not necessarily the price. So what I mean by that is you have 3 ways to grow your business: acquisition, acquiring new customers, monetizing them better, meaning your revenue per customer, and then retaining your customers. Within a subscription business, that means actually retaining them. Within other businesses, it's like repeat purchase rates, right? And the funny part is you have a lot of teams and a lot of horsepower dedicated to acquiring customers, right?
Yeah.
You have maybe a little bit of resources based on your retention. Like you're doing stuff every quarter. We're going to build this new feature, come out with this new thing, whatever it is. You probably have very, very little focused on your revenue per customer, which is your pricing, your monetization, right? But there's a lot of levers, right? So we do price localization one quarter. We experiment with our discounting strategy the next quarter. We change and raise our price the quarter after that. We come out with this new add-on the quarter after that. Like there's a lot of different things that you can do. So you should be changing something about your price or your monetization every quarter, but really only raising the actual number once per year. Now you might have effective increases like, hey, we're going to change how much we give away in each package, or we're going to move this feature from one tier to another. But I think that like a straight up price increase once a year, because almost probably 99% of people listening are not like, we're 6 months before an IPO, right? Like, and if you're like flying, you could probably get away. Like HubSpot prior to the IPO, like was raising their price like every 6 months. It's just a lot to handle, and you have to have a lot of like kind of production on top of it to make sure that things don't mess up. Now, one thing they did find though, and this is something you should add to your price increase, they would go to the existing customers, which depending on how you're going to communicate this might not be a good idea if you're going to use the email I just described. And they would say, hey, a price increase is coming. And if you are on our annual plan, we will keep your existing price for that next year, right? So they changed it up a little bit. And then they went to their pipeline and they said, hey, the price increase is coming. If you sign up by X date, end of the quarter or whatever, you will keep the existing price for the next year, right? So that basically cleared the decks and helped their retention, right? And so you can kind of combine some of those concepts with what I was just talking about.
Such smart strategies. In the chat, Isaiah mentioned that retention is going to be a key component. I think having a lower price at entry, lots of volume could be big in the next few quarters. So you mentioned that just getting more people is, freemium or ending up with the most users is a good strategy. Do you think that a lower price is a similar strategy to just get more people in?
No, so again, Isaiah, you're not here to defend or explain your question further. So I'm reading into your question and you're going to go, that's not what I meant, which is totally valid and fine. Right. I would say there's 2 things here. One, the thing that you just said about, okay, we're looking at our customer base, we're realizing they're hurting a lot, right? Or they're not going to be the ones who are doing okay. So we need to retain them as much as possible. Well, that retention plus adding a bunch of freemium, adding a bunch of community, getting a bunch of logos is really important. The thing I quibbled with there is that a lower price does not necessarily mean more volume. And I know like, you're like, but I took an econ class and supply and demand curves, right? The thing is that software, it doesn't act like a commodity good. And what I mean by that is there are times, and just to give you an example, one of the questions we also like to ask with pricing research is, at what point is it too cheap that you question the quality of it, right? Because what ends up happening with software is like, or I would say a lot of products, there's a lot of like, hey, this particular, product is claiming X, but they're only $50, right? That doesn't make any sense. And we have plenty of examples where people would like 10x their price, 50 to 500, and their revenue obviously goes up, but their conversion rate goes up, which is insane, right? And so Isaiah, I think it was, is not wrong, right? But it's not a blunt instrument. It's not a sledgehammer. What it means is like, in that case, I wouldn't lower my price. I might have salvage offers on my cancellation flows, where basically like, cool, someone's trying to cancel. Maybe I have a maintenance plan, or maybe I have like hey, we'll give you the next 6 months at $10 off. You just have to determine based on your own situation. But just because I lower my price does not mean my conversion is necessarily going to go up. There are some consumer products that will happen, but even like, I don't know, there's plenty of consumer products I've seen the inside of where they're like, we're going to go from $10 to $9, and it did nothing. We're going to go $10 to $5, did nothing to conversion rate. So you just have to be conscious of that sensitivity of your user base. If it's a commodity, yeah, you'll definitely see increased volume, but we're not selling commodities typically.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because you're right. Supply and demand, it almost feels counterintuitive. Like if I reduce the price, I should get a wave of new customers, and I don't think it works that way.
Yeah.
We've seen the same thing.
I think it's so backgrounds in econometrics and math, and I think the thing that it's kind of like remember in like elementary school they told us Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? And then in high school it's like, well, actually it's a little more complicated, Native Americans, Vikings, etc. And then in college they're like, yeah, it's actually a little more complicated. Not only is that all true, but also like Columbus is kind of an asshole, right? Like they kind of like goes like, it's like different levels based on education, right? Like same thing with supply and demand curves. Like supply and demand curves are not straight lines. Like they curve, they backward bend, they go all around, right? And it's at the end of the day, supply and demand is true. It's just, it's not like a one-to-one relationship, right? It might flatten out for a little bit, and then it might go down, and it might go back up again, right? And so I think that's the thing, that the mental model is totally right. It's just the sensitivity of willingness to pay is normally not as much as we think based on the mental model. So this allows me to use my overpriced degree. So excuse my indulgence there. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. All right. So outside of free, you mentioned community, you mentioned experience. These are other things different than price, but what practical kind of tips would you offer for really leaning into those areas?
So there's a lot of opportunity. It's a little hard because COVID, everyone was scared. So it was kind of, I feel bad saying it was like easy, but it was kind of easy to be like we did this whole, like we got a bunch of index data. We took all the ProfitWell users and we started an index, kind of like a stock index, to track every single day. How's it going, in terms of the ups and downs. Right. And then on top of that, we ended up, we like started it's in hindsight, it's a little cringe, but at the time, like it was really well appreciated. We started this like stimulus partnership thing where basically we got a bunch of software companies together to offer like deals, like basically like, hey, if anyone signs up, they can get $10 off here a month. They can get this for free. They can do whatever, right? Just to kind of help our community. Obviously, like we wanted more leads and we wanted customers still, but it was also like we wanted to help our community, right? So there's like stuff like that. I know HubSpot during COVID, like they really upped the number of events that they did, like webinars, like events, because people were looking for that connection, right? Normally in like stimulus, people are looking for content like this. Hey, I heard there's a recession. I'm hearing about it. I have uncertainty. I'm not necessarily scared, but what should I do? What should I not do? Right? So this type of content is really, really useful typically. And so doing stuff like that, I think is helpful. If you haven't tried free, I don't know if this is like the time to try free. COVID was definitely the time to do it. But it's like now, probably if you're in an affected area, like getting freemium, as kind of Isaiah was talking about, getting those folks in, because eventually they'll be monetized, as we get into better times in the next 18 to 24 months, or at least we realize we're in better times, which is probably more accurate. So there's a lot of things that you can do there, just to kind of boost things. Like this is the time maybe to I don't know, start that podcast for your customer base, right? Like stuff like that, that I think a lot of people, they always put off. And then now they're probably not going to do it a lot because they're like, oh, I got to worry about this other stuff. But like now's the time when people are like really craving information and craving that type of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, you guys put out a ton of content. And so shout out to all the content and podcasts and everything that you put out. If anyone listening has not seen all of their information, just check it out, ProfitWell.com. So you guys were acquired recently. Can we talk about that a little bit? So I think
whatever you want, Chris. You have the friend card, so whatever you want.
It was announced. I think you put out an email and a blog post, a LinkedIn post, and it was over 200 million. Is that right?
That's right. We're a bootstrap company, so we went from bootstrap to selling for over 200 million. Can't be public about the specific number because that's just how this works now, that I have a boss and we're part of a heavily venture-backed company and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, it's been interesting. I think it was definitely a learning experience. I think that's the most generic but also most like apt thing I can say about it.
So how long ago did you know that you were headed in that direction? Like, did you just wake up one day and there's a deal and it came together in a few months, or how long did it take to evolve?
Yeah, we did not want to sell, which from what I'm told is when the best time to sell is, because you're not wanting it, right? Like watch pot doesn't boil or whatever. So we were, as we were in bootstrap for a long time. We were going to raise money for the first time. We were like, all right, like at this point in the business, we are now having lots of $10,000 arguments, meaning like we have 5 initiatives, is not necessarily 5, but we have 5 initiatives, all make perfect sense. All should get funded, but we can't fund them all, right? And some of them were like 25,000, 100,000, right? Like it's more the principle of what I'm saying. And all of a sudden, we were like, that doesn't make any sense. We were underpaying ourselves and everyone for a long time. Like that, it was fine, but it was starting, we knew it was going to start holding us back a lot more than it was. And so all of a sudden it was like, well, we figured so much out about our business and we want, keep growing. Like it's time to raise money. Which I think is the right time, I think we should have raised money probably earlier, given our ambitions. That probably would have prevented this outcome, this specific outcome, but maybe would have given us another outcome. But, it's a little harder to Monday morning quarterback here. But long story short, we were like, cool, we're going to raise money. I knew Christian, the CEO of Paddle, for a while, went and talked to him and was like, hey, give me some advice. And he was like, what if we bought you? And I was like,
so he just proposed it casually?
Yeah, we were talking. Money? Well, what's funny is I had mentioned it January of last year. So, over 18 months ago, as like a joke in a meeting we had just about like content and partnering up and stuff. And then in late October, early November, I think right around there, this last year, so almost about a year ago, he was like, well, what if we bought you? And I was like, well, I don't know. Cause it's like my baby and we didn't want to stop, right? We weren't looking to sell. And then we got over that within a week and we went, well, if they can meet all these check boxes, which they won't, because this is the under circumstances we'll sell, then we'll sell. Right. And so we started having the conversations, started, kind of thinking through things and started a process as well. So we went out, we didn't hire a banker. We ended up going to all of our strategic partners and talking to them. And we made sure to, we didn't really go to PE, which may have been a mistake, but we kind of didn't, we were under the impression that we wanted to kind of partner and keep going. Right. And that was another way to get resources. So went through that process. I was supposed to take January off. I hadn't had a vacation in 5 years and I was like, I'm going to take January off. Well, basically the first paper we got was like mid-December, like an LOI kind of a thing. And then all of a sudden other paper was coming. So it just turned into this like game between mid-December, January 15th is when we signed the LOI officially. We had a number of offers, which was exciting and very blessed to have. And then January 15th to April 28th was, diligence and stuff. And then we closed April 28th. So, wow. Yeah, it was it probably was the best first time to go through this, meaning it was terrible time, like in the markets, Ukraine, all this stuff was happening.
Right.
And we were like, is this going to all fall apart? But probably the best like first marriage to have here, because both parties were so earnest to get it done. Like there was no like renegotiation of stuff. There was no squirreliness. There was no like jerks or anything like that. It was, there were 80 some lawyers, which, that's always fun. But long story short, it was not I don't know. It's the founder rewriting history that's going on in my head where I'm like, it wasn't that bad. Let's do it again. Like that's happening. At the time I was like, oh my God, this sucks. But yeah, so that's kind of the overview of the experience.
So when people go through an acquisition, it can either be like a PE firm, it can be a strategic buyer. And why paddle? Like, what was strategic about that? What did you like about that felt like you fit together?
Yeah. So one, I really like Christian. Christian and I think about the world almost like scarily the same way. Like we were on a call this week and I made a comment, like we were just talking about a bunch of stuff and I went, yeah, I think we should actually think about doing X and Y. And he's like, this is scary. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I just came from a meeting where I suggested that. And it was something that we had not talked about. Right. So very similar. And that's not always a good thing in partnerships, but it's a good thing in terms of like the vision that we had and the vision he had was very, like this is easy to come together because it's just more gunpowder and more, wider, playground. Right. And so I think that for us, it was the best for our users as well. Like we actually cared about those things. I mean, I'm not saying everyone doesn't, but a lot of people don't. And it was really good for our customers because we were like, oh, if we had access to this part of like the stack, there's so much more things we could do that we couldn't do unless we, joined forces with a company like this. And then I think it was also like role fit. Like we're not ready to stop in this space. I think we will be at some point, but we were like, no, we want to kind of keep going. Therefore, I'm on the board. Faku runs product. Pete runs a major part of the sales team. Our marketing, like everyone had a home. They really wanted all of our team. One of the LOIs, they were probably going to let go one of our teams because it just didn't make sense to bring them along, which, would have been fine. They would have been taken care of and everything like that. But it just kind of like all the boxes were checked. And then some of the other offers, like not all the boxes were checked. And so I think we definitely got a more lucrative offer. Or well, time will tell because stock components and stuff like that might be or probably will be more lucrative. But I don't know. It's like how much is enough, right? And so this was a very, very good outcome for myself and the rest of the team. So
that's amazing.
Looking good.
So yeah. So when you talk about the boxes that were checked, from the buyer and for the deal to go through, what boxes do you think had to be checked for you in order to be in the position of being purchased? Like if you had advice to any other founders out there to set themselves up, what do you think the most important factors were?
What I can tell you, so one, so there's a couple of things that are kind of tangential to your question I think are really important, and then a couple of things that are important. Like growth has to be in the right place. One of our products was doubling, another product was growing 70%. We have this free customer base. Like I think the way I think about it is you need clear measurable value, aka your growth and your revenue and stuff. But then I think you also need, I don't know what the right word for this is, but you need a couple of like other tokens, right? So for us, it was, we have all this like value, but then on top of it, we have a really good content arm. We have one of the best content arms in our space, right? Not just like our competitors, but like our whole industry. Like we have really good content for what we have. We have this free customer base, right? Which you can't really like value because there's not revenue, or you can like put a lead value on it, I guess, but it's not as measurable, right? So there's like another little token, right? You have like myself, who's in the industry and known in the industry and has lots of context in the industry, right? These are all these little tokens that I think the reason those are important is because like even a PE firm cares about some of those things because they can put in a model of what they think that's going to bring to some sort of outcome, right? Yeah. And then when things get hard, like there's always stuff that comes up in diligence, no matter how good you are. Those things like kind of pad the calculus a little bit, because it's like, well, this number turned out to be a little bit lower than we thought it was, like not because anyone was lying, but because we finally got really updated numbers. oh, it's not as good as we thought, but there's more of these things over here. So we think that makes like everything's fine. Right. And I think that helped a lot. I think the other thing is being, I also think like having multiple suitors helped a lot. It's a little awkward. It was mildly awkward towards the end or like even when it closed, because it was like, yeah, we totally dated other people, like, and you were the first one to talk to us, so we totally did, like, but they know it's the game, right? And so there was definitely the ability to put like the confidence that I had just to be like, well, we got an LOI from someone else. Okay, like, are you guys gonna like crap or get off the pot? You know what I mean? Like that type of a thing. I will say some of the mistakes we made, I don't know if we would have hired a banker if we did this 10 times over, but like looking at more options, like there's a couple of people that we didn't talk to, like in terms of like deal. And I was like, oh crap, like that was an oversight. Like that was like definitely an oversight, not talking to them, which, it all worked out. And then I think we have one person who runs all of finance and ops, all of it. So like it was not like in tip top shape. And so there was just a lot of like, there was stuff that they asked for, like audited financials, and we're like, we're not venture backed. Like we don't have audited financials. Like we're not lying about it, but like we don't have like this thing you need. And so like there's stuff like that they're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. But then there was other stuff where they were like, do you have these things? And we're like, oh crap, we had to go like chase down a bunch of people, like not behind their back, but we're just like, we will go chase down, whoever's needed for those things. And so I think the mistake we made is someone gave us really good advice that we were like, yeah, that's really smart, let's go do that. Where they said, you should tell operations person to prep the company for sale. The problem is we didn't ask anyone what that specifically meant. So we just kind of logically went off and like, well, we think all the DocuSigns should be in the same place. That makes sense. Like we do stuff like that. But what we should have done, and this is what anyone should do, go to a lawyer, your like corporate lawyer, your in-house, if you have one, and just be like, can you send me the last diligence list that you sent someone or your firm sent someone that just went through everything? Because then what we would have done is we would have been like, oh, here's these 300 prompts. A lot of them aren't applicable, but like, oh, we should get that in one place. They're going to ask for this. And then you can create like a nice little folder so that it makes it easier. If you've raised money, you've done a lot of this stuff probably already. But for the rest of us, it's just one of those useful things.
That's such a good tip. So just ask your lawyer, send me the last diligence list. And we have raised money, but I agree, like putting together the diligence docs for that's when you feel like the company's kind of in tip top shape, because you've got everything buttoned up and you're ready to go. So why not operate for that all the time? Great tip. All right. I want to get you out of here on time. I promised we'd be together for an hour. So I know you've got to get back to your beautiful San Juan
sunset.
Beach,
baby.
Yeah. Your beach over there. But thank you so much. This was cool. I appreciate all the pricing tips. If anyone joined late, go back to the beginning where he said September, it's over, like we're all good. I think at least that's how I interpreted it. No more bleeding.
Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Yeah.
Cool.
No, we're in a pretty good place. I think there might be some more blips, but yeah, we'll see. It's a lot shallower than I think people are thinking, but who knows? Like there's a lot of things happening in the world that could screw stuff up. China, Ukraine, all kinds of things. So you just got to keep yourself on your toes.
All right. Well, I'll stay on my toes, and I look forward to watching your continued progress with Paddle. Thanks again, man. So good to see you.
Awesome.
All right. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining the live stream. Be sure to subscribe to Organized Chaos if you're not already. We do these on LinkedIn every week, but we also do daily podcasts on the wherever you get your podcasts. And so this week's episodes include topics like why you should focus on the quality of your customers over the quantity, embracing change, building a better business with Jason Pfeiffer, who's the chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. Awesome energy. You will love that episode. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.